to us on our Facebook page, and you can post your music videos there. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, next week will mark the 9th anniversary of the first transfer of foreign prisoners to the U.S. military prison at Guantanamo Bay. Later this month comes another important milestone, 1 year since President Obama's promised deadline to shut the prison down. Shortly after coming into office in January 2009, Obama pledged to close Guantanamo no more than a year later.
In order to effect the appropriate disposition of individuals currently detained by the Department of Defense at Guantanamo, and promptly to close the detention facility at Guantanamo consistent with the national security and foreign policy interests of the United States and the interests of justice, I hereby order. And we then provide the process whereby Guantanamo will be closed no later than 1 year from now.
2 years after Obama's pledge, 173 people are still imprisoned in Guantanamo. The military's Guantanamo Review Task Force has cleared around 90 for release, but their future remains uncertain. Last month, Congress passed legislation that would effectively bar the transfer of Guantanamo prisoners to the United States for trial. The bill also bans the purchase or construction of any facility inside the U.S. to hold current Guantanamo prisoners.
Meanwhile, reports emerge President Obama is preparing to sign an executive order this year that would establish the government's right to indefinitely detain prisoners without charge or trial. According to ProPublica, the administration is expected to indefinitely hold at least 48 Guantanamo prisoners. That means more Guantanamo prisoners are now formally facing the prospect of lifelong detention, and fewer are facing charges than the day Obama was elected. We're joined here in New York by two guests. Andy Worthington is a London-based journalist, author of the book The Guantanamo Files, the stories of the 774 detainees in America's illegal prison. He's also co-director of the film Outside the Law, Stories from Guantanamo. And we're joined by Katherine Gallagher, a senior staff attorney at the Center for Constitutional Rights. On Thursday, CCR filed a request asking a Spanish court to subpoena the former commanding officer at Guantanamo, Major General Geoffrey Miller. The filing comes in a nearly 2-year Spanish probe of the alleged torture of 4 Guantanamo prisoners. Last month, CCR also asked another Spanish judge to prosecute 6 former Bush administration officials who authored the legal memos authorizing the torture of foreign prisoners. Diplomatic cables recently released by WikiLeaks show that the Obama administration's pressuring the Spanish government to drop an investigation into the officials, including former Attorney General Alberto Gonzales in 2009. Well, we welcome you both to Democracy Now! Andy Worthington, let's begin with you. You'll be in front of the White House Tuesday on the 9th anniversary of Guantanamo. It isn't closed. President Obama promised 2 years ago it would be within a year.
Yeah, and it's looking, it's looking very bad, actually, at the moment. It's looking like we have the possibility that very few prisoners at all will be released, before the 2012 elections. And what a horrible climb down from the great optimism that we had at the start of Obama's presidency. And so there are the specific issues, the problems with the cleared prisoners, I think is very, very important. That a task force established by the President of representatives of government departments, of the agencies, careful, sober people examining the cases of the men, said that 90 of them should be released. Now, 58 of these are Yemenis, and it's been a year now since the President announced a moratorium on releasing any prisoner from Guantanamo to Yemen because of the uproar that came about because Christmas 2009, a Nigerian man tried to blow up a plane, and it came out that he was apparently recruited in Yemen. So Yemen is now this entire terrorist country. Nobody cleared for release from Guantanamo can be released there because of these fears that they will join some terrorist cell. That's guilt by nationality, it's collective punishment. However you want to look at it, it's grossly unfair. And so that's a very important aspect.
And then there are some of these prisoners who the government wants to release, but they fear going back to the countries that they're being sent to. One just released, apparently, or sent back to Algeria, Saeed Farhi, in the last few days.
That's right, yeah. And I mean, his case is, that's a black mark for the government as well. He was actually appealing against the government's right to send him back to his home country that he didn't want to go back to. A third country could have been found for this man. But the Obama administration has demonstrated that Algeria is a country it wants to send people back to. But there are, there are other men still waiting in Guantanamo for third countries to be found who will take them. We saw in the WikiLeaks cables some examples of the kind of rather undignified horse trading that had been taking place, of trying to persuade other countries to take them. It still remains, a problem that at every level, at the highest levels of government in the United States, everybody who could, the courts, Congress, President Obama, refused to accept cleared prisoners to be brought to live in the U.S. mainland.
Katie, speaking of these WikiLeaks documents, which of course are U.S. diplomatic cables, what have you learned?
Well, what we saw last month in the case of our Spanish investigation is that the U.S., which has had the Obama administration, which has had a policy of really ensuring impunity for Bush administration officials, exported that policy to Spain and did everything it could through diplomatic, political pressure to ensure that the investigations undertaken in Spain would be closed, that no U.S. official from the Bush administration would face justice, investigation, prosecution, anywhere, especially in Spain, where there's a viable investigation ongoing.
What is the Center for Constitutional Rights demanding right now?
Right now, we've asked the Spanish judge, Judge Ruz, who's overseeing the investigation, to subpoena Geoffrey Miller and to finally have the former commander of Guantanamo explain exactly what was happening in Guantanamo and his role in the torture and abuse of Guantanamo detainees, including Mohammed el-Qahtani.
Well, and the revelations in the WikiLeaks cables that the chief prosecutor in Spain was actually in direct communication with U.S. officials and, in essence, trying to fix the system has been a huge story in Spain, while it's gotten almost no attention here.
Yes, and the filings that we did yesterday are front-page news already today in Spain. It's unfortunate that this isn't getting covered in the United States. It's more than unfortunate. It's deeply disturbing. But there, yes, we may see people lose their jobs over the obstruction of justice.
And, of course, this is more than going after General Miller, to trying to get him to talk. You're talking about going after the so-called Bush Six. Explain and how the Obama, not the Bush administration, but the Obama administration has responded.
Sure. Officially, the Obama administration has said nothing about this case against the so-called Bush Six. 6 lawyers from the Bush administration who were the authors of the torture memos, the architects behind the scenes of the torture program, giving legal cover for what we saw happen in Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib and in Afghanistan. So publicly, they have not responded to this case. Behind the scenes, we see that there were calls and meetings to diplomats in Spain, to the Attorney General, to the prosecutor, ministers of justice, ministers from the Department of Foreign Affairs in Spain, and that U.S. members of Congress, Republicans, were having meetings in Spain under the Obama administration, saying, halt this prosecution. It's not good for bilateral relations.
And although a judge has demanded that the Obama administration respond, they have not? They're just completely ignoring the subpoenas?
Yes. Well, there haven't been subpoenas, but there have been 3 requests sent by one judge saying, look, are you investigating this or should I proceed? And the Obama administration has been silent. So hopefully at this point the judge will say, I'm moving forward.
And Andy, the implications for the Obama administration that it's entirely possible that 4 years after he assumed office that Guantanamo will still be open and holding prisoners?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's very much what it looks like. I mean, I think there's a big problem with this notion of 48 men who his task force said could be held indefinitely without charge or trial. On the face of it, if you don't examine it, it's like, okay, they're saying they're dangerous, they don't have the evidence. What does that mean? One worry is that the evidence that the supposed evidence that they've been relying on is actually not trustworthy. I mean, this is such a fundamental problem with the Guantanamo evidence, is that it's been tortured out of people. But it's in conflict with something that's also been proceeding for all these years, which is the legal cases, the prisoners' own habeas corpus petitions. And these prisoners have habeas corpus petitions ongoing. Many of them have not had their cases heard by a judge. And yet there are these 48 designated for indefinite detention, which kind of preempts the legal process. And also, I think we'll find, if people are able to examine it, that some of these 48 men are the people who've lost their habeas petitions. Now, 19 men have lost their habeas petitions so far. And most of them, when you look at what the judges found out, they were very peripheral foot soldiers in the military conflict that that took place before the 9/11 attacks in Afghanistan. These men are not terrorists.
There will be protests next week in front of the White House on Tuesday?
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's where you'll be?
And there's a screening of my film Outside the Law, Stories from Guantanamo Revolution Books in New York tonight.
Ah, okay. We'll link to it at democracynow.org. That does it for our show. Thanks very much to Katherine Gallagher, Senior Staff Attorney at CCR, and Andy Worthington, author of the Guantanamo Files. That does it for our show. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, show photo producer Armando Steve Martinez, Nicole Salazar, Honey Massoud, Marvi Karen, I'm Amy Goodman, Juan Gonzalez. Thanks for joining us.